Greetings and welcome to another episode of Bible Students Online. Well, not too long after posting part 2 of my testimony from Jehovah's Witness to Bible student, someone made this comment. Very interesting and odd to me to listen to someone who is still studying Russell's writings, stating in their mind that Brother Russell was not a Christian because of, quote, his relationship with Rose Ball and well-known marital issues. Now, I don't know if this person is male or female, so I'm not going to speculate. So I'll just refer to them as they. They commented, Rose Ball first encountered Russell's movement in 1884 and later worked at the Bible House in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where Russell resided. She lived with Russell and his wife Maria as their supposed foster daughter from 1889 to 1897. By 1894, Russell had developed an intimate relationship with Rose Ball, whom he referred to as, quote, my little wife. This relationship was reportedly known to Maria Russell, who felt distressed about it. The exact nature of their relationship is unclear, but it appears to have been romantic and possibly inappropriate, given Russell's marital status. In 1897, Maria Russell filed for divorce and separation from Charles Tace Russell, citing his infidelity with Rose Ball as a major reason. The divorce proceedings were highly publicized, and Russell's reputation suffered as a result. First, let me just add a little thing here. Even though Mrs. Russell's name is spelled M-A-R-I-A, Maria, sources close to her say that it was actually pronounced Mariah. But for the sake of this video, since everyone calls her Maria, we'll just call her Maria. Through the years, there have been many charges thrown at C.T. Russell. Mostly doctrinal, but there have been some, personal attacks. Probably the most infamous of these charges are his very public divorce from Sister Russell. And so, over 100 years later, claims of him being a pedophile, a sex offender, a womanizer, having a number of affairs have been published in various books, online forums, chapters, and references, you name it. And it all seems to stem from one source, where people keep adding to it, or spreading something they feel is the truth when in fact it wasn't. There weren't any accusations against Russell during his lifetime that labeled him as a pedophile or a sex offender. However, after he passed away, some people started to make those claims about him. Kind of like this one here. Let's see if I could show this one to you. This is in front of the camera. Here's one. Charles T. Russell, child molester. And this one was written by Dwayne McNanny back in 1986. Miss McNanny was a former Jehovah's Witness elder. He also posts on here, you can see, there you go, actual pages of the court transcript. Those pages he feels are, discriminating against C.T. Russell. So, one of the biggest challenges that Russell had to deal with was about his wife, Maria Frances Russell. Little history. They met and tied the knot in 1879. They had a lot of joyful years together, according to both sources. She was always there for him. She helped him publish Zion's Watchtower and spread what we call the Harvest Truth or the Harvest Message. During a tough period from 1891 to 1894, where there were certain ones who were trying to wrestle control of the society from Brother Russell, feeling he had too much control, she remained by his side, using scriptures to show that he was that servant. Yes, in case you didn't know, Maria Russell was the one that wrote the article that claimed that Charles Taze Russell was that faithful and wise servant of Matthew 24. Prior to that, Brother Russell applied it to the church in general. Apparently, Sister Russell was tired of only being her husband's assistant. She wanted to write her own articles, which she did, but she wanted to write them for the Watchtower without him editing them. I mean, he was in fact the editor, and he edited everyone's articles. He believed he couldn't let that happen because it would conflict with his duties to God and the truth. And this made her even more determined. So soon her family began to back her up and standing up to Brother Russell. Now, a lot of the accusations seem to come from what Sister Russell said in the Brooklyn Daily Eagle. This was a newspaper in that time that often made fun of C.T. Russell. But much of her testimony was removed from the official court records. So I have a copy of the actual court records somewhere in this mess behind me, but I just can't seem to locate it. I don't know if it's in this room or if it's in the garage in a box somewhere, but when I do find it, I will share it. So for now, we're going to have to rely on what others say was included. Now, the idea that he was a pedophile seemed to stem from Russell mentioning that Rose Ball looked to be about 13, along with some comments made by Rutherford in his book, A Great Battle in the Ecclesiastical Heavens, which was published in 1915. So Rutherford in his book references the court records and also includes the page numbers. So if you have the actual court transcripts, you can then go to those page numbers and look it up yourselves. So we're gonna share some of the quotes from Rutherford's book, and there he mentions that during the trial, Sister Russell shared that a woman named Miss Ball told her that her husband said, "I'm like a jellyfish, drifting around. I connect with this person and that person, and if one shows interest, I stick with her. If not, I just move on to someone else." It's kind of creepy. I'm not even quite sure what that means, but that's the quote. That's the famous jellyfish story. Now, the court decided to remove all of this information from the record, and they wouldn't even let the jury see it. And so when talking to the jury, the judge explained that, quote, "This little incident about this girl that was in the family, this is beyond the ground of the libel and has nothing to do with the case because not being put in it, and it was condoned or allowed to pass," end quote. So it's clear that this jellyfish story was completely made up by Sister Russell, and other evidence in records prove that it couldn't possibly be true. Pastor Russell strongly insisted that nothing like that ever happened. And it seems pretty silly for anyone to claim something like that about themselves. Now, according to the article entitled "Truth is Stranger Than Fiction," from the Watchtower of July 15, 1906, Russell said that he had never made such a statement. He says that Rose Ball was said to have mentioned this to her about 13 years before the court testimony took place. So, on page 138 of the court transcripts, Brother Russell was asked if he had ever made such a statement. And he responded, "No, sir. I never made use of such an expression. I hope I don't look idiotic enough to say that. In my opinion, any man that claims to be a jellyfish would have no sense at all. I would like to be given credit for having some backbone." Rutherford stated, "The most conclusive facts disclosed by the record showing her statement to be untrue are these. Miss Ball came to them in 1889, a child of 10, and was taken into the home of Mr. and Mrs. Russell." Rutherford was clearly wrong about Rose Ball's age when she joined the Russells. Doing some digging, I found that she was born on March 19, 1869, which would have made her at least 19 years old when she joined the Russells. She married Ernest Hennings in 1897 when she was roughly 28 years old. The both of them were in Europe by 1900. Rutherford didn't even show interest in Brother Russell's works till around 1906, 1907. So he most likely never met Rose Ball. And according to Russell and other people's comments, Rose appeared, acted, and dressed in a way that made her look much younger than her actual age. That could be true, but it's very doubtful that she looked 10 years old, which would have been roughly half her age. Now, Rutherford relates regarding Rose Ball that she was treated as a member of the family. She was an orphan. She kissed both Mr. and Mrs. Russell goodnight each evening when she retired. They treated her as their own child. And this is found on page 90 and 91 of the court records. So, it's important to note that Sister Russell mentioned her husband kissing Rose Ball, suggesting that, well, that's inappropriate. It seems like Sister Russell wanted to make it look like her husband was acting in an inappropriate manner with Rose. However, the truth of the matter is that both she and Brother Russell kissed Rose. And apparently she didn't find anything wrong with that. Now, a lot of people have been taking Sister Russell's testimony and Brother Russell's response and have kind of, twisted them to make it seem like Brother Russell confessed to being a pedophile of sort. If we say that Russell's comments about caring for Rose Ball means he's a pedophile, then, what do we say about every dad who gives his child a good night kiss or lets them sit on his lap? Are they also pedophiles? I don't know. Rutherford stated that Mrs. Russell testified that the jellyfish incident transpired in 1894 when the girl could not have been more than 15 years of age. That's on page 1.5 of the court records. I'm not quite sure why it's a 1.5, but that's how it's labeled. But, as was reported, Rose was a young adult of 1920 when she came to the Bible House in 1889. She would have been about 24, 25 years old in 1894. Nevertheless, it's reported that she looked like she was about 10 years old, which, again, in my mind, doesn't seem so. Now, some people have said that Brother Russell could have asked Rose Ball to speak for him during the jellyfish story, but he chose not to. The truth is that Brother Russell had no clue that his wife had ever said anything like what she claimed in court. He mentioned that he only found out about those complaints on the day that Sister Russell made her accusations. Now, back in the 1900s, they didn't have that, you know, fast travel and communication options that we have today. You know, um, email, text messaging, or anything like that, where, you know, boom, you send it and they got it. So, you know, back then it was either writing a letter, it was, you know, selling a telegram. It would have taken a long time to contact Rose Ball, who was living in Australia with her husband, to get her to testify. Plus, Rose and her husband by this time had disagreed with Russell's teachings on the issue of the New Covenant and other biblical topics. And so this created tension between brother and sister Hennings and brother Russell. So it's very unlikely that she would have agreed to help, even if Russell had the chance to reach out to her. Now, later on, it was said that Rose's only comment about brother Russell was that he had, quote, left the truth, which was about his teachings on the New Covenant. Now, the main issue here isn't that brother Russell didn't ask Rose for help in court. Instead, since it was sister Russell who brought up the jellyfish story and other claims, why didn't she try to get Rose's testimony? It seems like she was using information that wasn't directly from Rose. Brother Russell had no clue that she was going to make such an accusation and only found out about it when they were mentioned in court. And because of this, Brother Russell's lawyers wanted to delay the case to gather, you know, some testimony from Rose Ball Hennings. But that request was turned down. Now, we don't know exactly what the lawyer's plan was, but it seemed like he wanted more time to get Rose's input. Now, Sister Russell knew where Rose Ball was living and could have asked her to be a witness ahead of time, but she chose not to. Now, 3 years after the jellyfish story was said to have been shared with Sister Russell, she calls a committee meeting where she and her husband talked about their disagreements. This was a committee of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. She was a member of the board of directors. So she calls this meeting. 2 members from that committee later testified in court that they had discussed all the issues between brother and sister Russell. The court records indicate that these issues related to how the Watchtower was run, and it was noted that after the meeting, brother and sister Russell reconciled. However, Sister Russell never mentioned any worries about Mrs. Ball or the jellyfish story during that committee meeting. If she had known about it back then, she could have brought it up and say, this man is incapable of running this organization. Look what he's done. But she never brought it up. Why? Maybe because it never happened? Now, during the trial, Sister Russell's lawyers pointed out that Brother Russell had locked himself in a room with Emily Matthews. In court, Brother Russell explained the situation. Now he's sitting there in the testimony box, I guess you want to call it. And as he's talking, he's actually addressing Sister Russell directly. And he says, "Dear, you know all about this. That was the room where we emptied slops and carried water. It was the morning Emily was sick, and you asked me to check on her while they were busy with water pails. I locked the door for just a moment to listen to what she had to say quietly, and nothing inappropriate happened. I would have been fine with everyone in this room being there." And that's on page 97 of the record of testimony. Sister Russell didn't deny this. However, when Emily Matthews found out, she came to court to testify in favor of Brother Russell. Before testimony could be heard, the court decided to remove the matter from the record, which meant it was closed for the court's purposes. And as a result, her testimony was never presented. It was what they call stricken from the record. This removal might not have helped Brother Russell, as there wasn't enough time for him or his lawyers to gather other testimony. So, stricken from the record simply means that the jury was told to, ignore that part. But the court record still kept all of Sister Russell's accusations. It just didn't include any potential testimonies that could have countered what she said. Rutherford stated in his book that Mrs. Russell herself did not believe and never has believed that her husband was guilty of immoral conduct. It's shown by the record in this case where her own counsel, on page 10, asked Mrs. Russell this question: "You don't mean that your husband was guilty of adultery?" And her answer was simply no. Even with all her stories, Sister Russell wasn't actually saying that her husband cheated on her. So from looking at parts of the court records, it seems like she was just trying to find anything in different situations that she could twist to make it look like he was acting in a way she thought was inappropriate. Now, many people who accuse Brother Russell tend to take Sister Russell's words at face value without digging deeper. They often twist what she said to make it sound different from her actual statements. At the same time, they usually disregard what Brother Russell had to say, thinking, well, it's not important. It's important to remember that we shouldn't just believe everything Sister Russell says in court, especially since a lot of it is based on hearsay. Unfortunately, it's easy to make false claims about someone and present, evidence in a way that makes to make those claims seem true. However, those who are against Brother Russell often don't want to consider all the facts. They seem to focus only on Sister Russell's testimony, treating it as if, this is the absolute truth, even though they frequently misrepresent it. And so, this leads to more than just accepting her accusations. Many have added their own claims, saying that, Brother Russell is an adulterer, a pedophile, a child abuser, a sex offender, a predator, and other silly things. The facts show that there was no direct testimony in court from any witnesses that proved that Russell was guilty of any kind of sexual misconduct. And it's an interesting detail that about what occurred after the divorce trial was shared by Rutherford in his book. He says that shortly after the trial of the above case, the Washington Post published aforementioned jellyfish story in connection with the name of Pastor Russell, and charged that he was guilty of immoral conduct. Thereupon, Pastor Russell filed suit for libel against the Post, which case was tried before a jury. The instructions of the court, on behalf of the defendant, the Post, were manifestly erroneous and prejudicial. Notwithstanding this, the jury brought in a verdict exonerating Pastor Russell, but allowed him only $1 damages. Pastor Russell thereupon appealed to the Superior Court, which court reversed the judgment of the lower court and remanded the case for retrial, that a jury might have opportunity to assess larger damages. The case came on for trial the second time, and after plaintiff had put in a portion of his testimony, counsel for the Washington Post offered a compromise, and the case was settled by the defendant, the Washington Post paying to Pastor Russell a substantial sum of money, together with all costs in the court case, and the Post thereafter published his sermons. Thus he was completely exonerated by two different courts concerning the jellyfish or immoral story. So here the Washington Post finds this story. They run with it. They publish it. There's a lawsuit. The courts decide, okay, you're right. We're going to give you $1 damage, which happens even today. They go back to court, and the Washington Post decides to settle out of court and gives him an undisclosed amount of money. And from that point on, they start to publish his sermons in their paper. There was more to the story. Rutherford mentioned a preacher in New Jersey who wrote an article that got published in a Chicago paper called the Mission Friend. I did some research. I couldn't find any extra information about this situation online. I went through the archives to see if I could find, scans of this paper, but it just doesn't exist. There are little footnotes online about the paper and about the group, but it seemed to be not a major newspaper, just a small local religious newspaper that decided to take advantage of the situation and publish the so-called jellyfish story that Sister Russell had talked about in court. So as a result, Brother Russell decided to take legal action against the Mission Friend for libel, and after a hearing, the Mission Friend paid all its costs and published a retraction, admitting that it had wrongfully published the Miss Ball or jellyfish story concerning Pastor Russell, further stating that Pastor Russell is a Christian and a gentleman of the highest integrity and moral standing and entitled to the respect and esteem of all good people. Now, Mrs. Russell's bill of complaint admitted that there had been no cohabitation between herself and her husband. And her attorney attempted to make out of this that, she was deprived of one of the chief pleasures of life. Now, the court would not permit this. The fact is that the matter was in Mrs. Russell's own control. She did understand that her husband preferred to live a celibate life, but she agreed and expressed the same as her preference. She knew about his teachings on the subject that's found in the Volume 6 of Studies in the Scriptures, Chapter 12, that neither the husband nor the wife may defraud the other of reasonable marital rights. That's a quote from the July 15, 1906 Watchtower, Truth is Stranger Than Fiction. So, this is kind of odd, but now, for the record, the Russells met in early 1879, where Sister Russell heard Brother Russell speak. I think it was at some kind of parlor that he spoke at. As a result, they spent a lot of time together in the service of the Lord. And thinking that it was inappropriate, they entered into what is today a sexless marriage, which from what I understand was a common practice in his day. Brother Russell was dedicated to the Lord, and as such, refrained from any type of fleshly pleasures. And Sister Russell was in agreement, and they ventured together in this marriage. Do I agree? No, but who am I to judge? I found these stats online interesting. It says here that on one site, sexless marriages are not uncommon. It is estimated that from 20% to 30% of marriages are sexless, which is roughly defined as having sex 10 times per year or less. As many as 1 in 7 married adults in the United States are in relationships with little to no sex. Sex can disappear for a wide range of reasons, including relationship problems and health issues. So, that's today. I can't imagine what it was back then. But yeah, people. I guess his view was, I'm gonna be. I'm just going to serve the Lord, and to be married and to have children is going to distract me from that role, and I'm going to be like a eunuch of some kind, where I'm just going to refrain from any kind of sexual pleasures, and that's it. And he met Sister Russell, and she felt the same way, and they said, fine, we can do this together. The following appeared in the 1911 issue of the Bible Students Monthly, Volume 3, Number 13. It's an article entitled Pastor Russell Heard From. This was a large 4-page paper that was published by the Society. And the quote here is, I remind you briefly of the facts. A most excellent and noble wife became mentally poisoned by women's rights when I refused to allow such ideas a place in my journal. The Watchtower, she became my bitterest enemy. First, she tried to coerce me. This failing, she since seeks to destroy my influence. Yet never was a wife more kindly treated. Our property by mutual consent was all devoted to the Lord's cause, whilst we were in fullest accord. Provision was made merely for the necessities of life for both of us. When she changed her mind, she demanded the money we had devoted to God's cause. I paid her $40 per month. She appealed to the courts for more money. However, that is all settled, for in 1909, during my absence in Europe, preaching, 5 of my friends, all men, made up a purse of $10,000, settled with Mrs. Russell, and took her receipts for 5 years' allowances, ordered by the court, which they knew I had not means to pay. It should be interesting that Joseph Rutherford, Brother Russell's father, he remarried. He married Emma H. Ackley. Now, if that last name sounds familiar, it's because Maria Russell is an Ackley. And so Emma and Maria were fleshly sisters. So Sister Russell's sister was also Brother Russell's stepmother. And they had children. And there are still descendants of their family alive today. Now, Sister Russell was an important figure in the Watchtower Society. She was a member of the board of directors. She served as secretary and treasurer for several years. She regularly wrote for Zion's Watchtower and even served as an associate editor for a while. Over time, she wanted more influence over what got published in the magazine. However, she became upset when she realized that her writings could only be published if Brother Russell, who was the magazine's editor, approved them based on their alignment with the scriptures. It should be noted that in the beginning, there were 5 regular contributors to the pages of the Watchtower, which Brother Russell either approved or edited for approval. And so his wife was no exception. Although he tried to support her, she decided to leave him in November 1897. And after some legal battles that she started in 1903, she received a court ruling in 1908 that granted her a separation along with alimony. But it was not. It wasn't a full divorce. It was what they called a divorce from bed and board. Simply put, in today's terms, a separation. And this can be seen by her recognition of her husband years later. During his funeral at Carnegie Hall in Pittsburgh in 1916, dressed in the veil, she walked up to her casket and placed a bouquet of lilies of the valley on it with a ribbon, um, to my beloved husband. Uh, Apparently, these were Russell's favorite flowers. So, what about Rose Ball going to Australia? Brother Russell in the article says, in the Bible Student Monthly, he says, why, of course. She did not stay a child in short dresses all the time. She married and went to Australia with her husband. Remember, this is quite ancient history, which the ego considers news. 20 years ago, Rose kissed my wife and me every night when she retired, and she did this at my wife's suggestion. It was at that time that she came crying to me and sat on my knee to tell her troubles as to a father. No one knows better than my wife that there was absolutely nothing impure in any of my dealings with that foster child. I did not get a chance to furnish my testimony in court because the trial judge discerned that no immorality was charged in my wife's plea and ordered everything of the kind stricken from the court records. Now, one thing I'd like to add. Roseball Hennings and her husband started the second largest schism in the Bible student history. The first after his death in 1916. They published a paper called The New Covenant Advocate, which I have up there somewhere on the shelf. And this journal was published from 1909 to 1944 when Roseball passed away. They wrote and published books, booklets, and articles for their journals. In the index to the journals, there are only 4 references to Brother Russell. All of them were doctrinal. So, don't you think if Russell was behaving inappropriate toward Rose, she would have said something? Published an article? Well, let me tell you what Pastor Russell is really like. No. The comments were about his beliefs, not his character. If she wanted to cause damage, she could have done so and played the little victim. But the truth of the matter is, nothing happened. Now, I know that this presentation isn't probably going to dissuade any of Brother Russell's, staunch critics, that they'll continue to promote this false story without doing any real research. And that's unfortunate. So, in future episodes, we'd like to delve into other accusations against Russell. So, as usual, if you enjoyed this episode, hit the thumbs up. If you didn't enjoy it, hit the thumbs down. The choice is yours. Don't forget to subscribe. And as always, if you have any suggestions, any comments, anything you'd like to see discussed in future episodes, well, drop a comment below. And Lord bless and have a pleasant day.